the chair of the committee. The event is being streamed live on YouTube, and I welcome all those actually in attendance in Committee Room 1 and everybody watching on YouTube. Before we start the meeting, could everybody make sure your mobiles and laptops are on silent or switched off, because we will start with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives. I have received no apologies for absence. Does any member have any interest to give now? There are 2 sets of minutes to comment on. Minutes of the meeting on the 18th of September. The amended minutes have been circulated. Does the committee agree that I can sign those as correct?
No, in the pre-meeting I had some questions. Those amendments been done, and do they need to be spoken to publicly?
I did suggest you needed to just mention
right.
The
okay. I will do that. On page 6, I think it is. It's probably there's a double printed here. It's page 6, the second page, and then I think on this. Under item below item 2, I believe it's just a typo. In the second line, it says the chair executive. Presumably that is the chief executive.
Thank you.
And they on the next page at the top, under item 4, it's not clear the way it's worded. And I have no precise suggestions for it should be. Whether the leader of the council accepts the findings of the inquiry as herself or as on behalf of the council. I'm sure it's both, but I think we need some clarity of English there. I'm happy to leave it to our officers to clarify that. But the way it's worded, it implies that it's just her as herself accepting the inquiry.
Well, I think we'll leave the minutes as they are, sign them as they are, and then we can seek some clarity afterwards, because I don't think we can verify that now.
And then it could be worded the leader of the council on behalf of the council is fully accepting the findings of the inquiry.
Well, I'm going to sign them as they are, and then maybe if Yusuf goes back and finds that there's something different, we can amend them at the
I'm happy.
Retrospectively. And then the minutes of her meeting held on the 23rd of October. Also good. Can we agree those? Yeah. Thank you very much. I will sign both of those. And we're going to start on the update on the Grenfell support and the response to the external scrutiny activity. So can I welcome Sarah, do you want to come to the table too? Thank you very much. Yeah. We've seen a lot of you, Joe and Callum. Thank you very much. And Sarah, thank you for coming out again this evening. But this is a very important paper. And so I'm grateful for you. Who wants to? Joe, you're in charge of.
Thanks.
Introducing this.
Yeah, so this paper covers 3 key things. Firstly, an update on the community support for the immediate community, which is funded through the Global Settlement Agreement. That was an area which, as you'll remember, when the model was agreed by the leadership team back in June, there were certain elements which we needed to work. We agreed we needed to work with the community to flesh out a bit further. So we're coming back here ahead of the leadership team on the 11th of December with some of that detail that we've worked with the community on. The second is an update on the ongoing plans for scrutiny and monitoring of the programme. In fact, all three programmes, so the support for bereaved survivors, the support for the immediate community, and the education and training support. And that has been led by the external scrutiny team, who have done some quite extensive engagement over the last year with the community to look at what they want to measure and report going forward. And that includes the appointment of a new independent scrutiny function, which, alongside scrutiny from the OSC and the other select committees, will help to ensure both residents and indeed defendants that the money is being used in the way that was intended. And the third, last but not least, is the external scrutiny team, as we discussed at the meeting in September, made some wider recommendations for the council on the back of their engagement with the local community and bereaved survivors, and that was not specifically related to the consultations, but spoke to some of the wider questions about culture and about treatment of residents and ways of working. And we agreed to come back to this committee with an update on our response to those recommendations, which again will go to the leadership team on the 11th.
Thank you. I know my committee got lots of questions. I'm going to start. Portia, have you got a question?
Okay, yes, Chair, thank you. Based on what you just said, Chair, thank you for the report, by the way. Based on what you just said, how will the external scrutiny team be selected? How will the external scrutiny team be selected?
Thanks, Councillor. So the current external scrutiny team has left us essentially with an outline of the kind of role that they think we need to perform that function. What we've agreed with them is that there needs to be a body to appoint that, which has to be done by the council in the same way that the EST itself was appointed by the council. But we will ask leadership team for approval to go out for a grant award process, which will be open to any organisation or consortium of organisations who might want to put themselves forward for it. I think the current EST has made some stipulations that shouldn't be an organisation based in the borough, to make sure it's independent. And we will then involve bereaved survivors and residents in that process of selecting that organisation, and we're happy to bring an update to the committee once we're part way through that process.
Thank you.
Just to add, it's worth saying that the claimants' lawyers, who formally chose with the claimants themselves the previous EST, have asked to be involved in that process. They've discharged their responsibility to us to actually go about doing the procurement this time, and they want to make sure they're comfortable with the allocation. So they're providing that additional challenge.
Thank you. And just one other question. What part do the North Kensington councillors play in this selection process?
Well, we'd be very happy to talk to you about how we might involve North Kensington councillors in that selection process. I think that would be appropriate alongside residents and bereaved survivors to make sure that they are represented, perhaps particularly the councillors for Nottingdale or councillors who live there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Tim.
Well, it's really on the same line. So I won't underline too much. Just to say, in terms of just identifying people who will be involved, community members and residents, so forth. Just that there's anything sort of in place, or just that there's an awareness of the same people turning up to do the same things. There is a line about undue power and undue influence, I think. Yes, unfair power and influence. So I just want to sort of raise that and ask if there's, some sort of idea about how you can keep an eye on that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we will do once we've got that approval to go out for a kind of competitive process is we will write to all bereaved survivors and all residents and invite them to put themselves forward. I would suggest at this stage we haven't finalised plans, but that we, in addition to a kind of formal panel, we will also do some kind of information sessions where people come and find out a bit more about the process of appointing people. And I think it's really important that when we do that, we make sure it's not just people who always turn up to the same meetings. We have found that there is really real value through the implementation steering group of working with the same group, but that doesn't mean, but what that group itself has told us is that we also need to find ways to include other people in that decision making and keep communicating with a kind of wider group of residents. So I think we need to strike that balance. Working with a small group allows you to kind of make progress and make sure you pick up where you left off, but we don't want anyone to feel excluded from that process.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are just some people who have more time and information and, skills or whatever. But as you say, I think it's just something, it's extremely important to reach out as much as possible and keep an eye on it ongoing and sort of get into a sort of complacent. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to sort of note again that this funding has been agreed by lawyers without particular reference to necessarily particular need. So when we look on page 5, the top at that table there, we have 18 million, 10 million and 22 million. And I just want to draw everyone's attention to, I think, Callum and Joe, you probably had an idea, how many households or individuals is that 10 million supposed to support?
There are about 5,500 households in that immediate 500 metre area.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is quite a lot. And I personally, also being a ward councillor for Nottingham, do have concerns that is in no way adequate. And I know that some residents in the engagement mentioned that as well. So I'm just wondering, how would we identify that was or wasn't enough to meet the need? Because we see in a lot of the engagement and the papers that come to scrutiny, this is about meeting needs. I think it's been a really difficult job for the team to actually, certainly the community aspect of it, to be able to spread that very limited amount of funding to get the best value from it. So how would we know whether that was or wasn't adequate to meet the needs?
Thanks, Councillor Simmons. So I think we've been clear through all the paperwork so far that this money itself will not meet some of the wider needs that have been identified through particularly the joint strategic needs assessment. And I think this committee indeed has plans to look at the kind of wide range of things that are being done to meet the needs identified through in that document. What I do think is that there are elements of this programme which are both kind of new ways of working with the community and offer perhaps more direct support, more individual choice and control, which I think are positive. I think through the work of the advocacy team and indeed through the leisure centre memberships and the wellbeing grants, we will actually be able to gather quite a lot of information about kind of where some of that need is. We've talked in the paperwork about, particularly for the wellbeing grants, using some of the information we gathered to establish whether we've got that right, whether we need to look at an enhanced rate. And one of the things that the external scrutiny team is very clear is that we need to use evidence gathered through this programme to share with the wider council. So where it touches on perhaps wider issues that are identified around support for low-income households, for example, or other kinds of questions, that we really use this programme to identify some of those issues and flag them. So I think we have quite a lot of information through the JSNA about those wider needs, but I think this programme itself is an opportunity to gather more, and perhaps given the way that the advocacy team intends to work, which is kind of intensively with people face-to-face, door-knocking, reaching out in new ways, that we might actually understand more about people's experience than we currently do.
Well, thank you. I think I know it's complicated and intertwined, but wider needs sort of perhaps being pre-existing or non-Grenfell needs. And my concern is that it's the Grenfell-related needs that this is not enough to address. And I would like to propose for the lead member to perhaps think about ways to augment this should the evidence base suggest it. And I think that probably central government has a role in that too.
But I think what's really interesting is with the advocacy team, they've discovered, since they're just forming now, is that they have found different things going on in the council that they didn't know was available. And I think we always hear people don't know where things are available, what's available. And so I think this team is really going to bring everything together. That's the hope. And that we will find there's pockets of, different offers all over the place. People don't know they exist. So
Yeah, and I think this is a really good opportunity to sort of be part of and be driving also some of the changes in the council that we need. So, excellent, thank you. I think I'll give you that.
That's Lucy. Mine was the selection of the ISF, so we'll share.
thank you.
Donna?
Couple of questions, thank you. Can I just firstly say, I think the concept of the adaptive challenge is actually very welcome. And I thought that was probably one of the better papers that I've read in terms of trying to get to the number of things we really need to do in terms of culture change. I will welcome that. My question was about the annual wellbeing grants and the concept of a household, and actually whether that was going to be spread too thinly if there's multiple people in a household as opposed to 2 people, and whether we'd given any consideration to that.
Thanks, Councillor Gardner. And that was a lively topic of discussion with the implementation steering group. We did a few rounds at it. There were different views about whether larger households would necessarily need more money or whether there was something quite attractive about a flat rate. What we eventually agreed is that we would start with the flat rate, and I think what some people said was actually there are some things that would support recovery which actually cost the same regardless of how big your household is, and some where you want to flex. And so what we've agreed is to start with a flat rate, to hold some of that funding back, and then to ask some follow-up questions so that we understand whether a larger amount of money would have made a significant difference because of the household composition, or indeed because of the kind of the profound nature of the impact of the tragedy on that particular household. But that's one of the things we want to do through the first year of the programme, is gather some of that information and then make a judgment about whether we need to change the approach.
You also talk about how you're communicating it and how you're going to tell people. And I'm wondering to what extent you've looked at bodies like Clement James Centre in terms of putting that message out to clients of theirs and indeed other organisations do likewise.
Thanks for that. So I think that's right. We are going to work with local voluntary and community sector organisations. I think what we've heard so far, though, is that we can't just rely on those perhaps more established partners, and that we need to find ways to communicate directly with households, whether that's door knocking or flyering, or kind of going to estates where people are and kind of reaching them there. So it will be a mixture, and I think the implementation steering group has been really clear that we need to get the communications right, and that it needs to be a kind of regular drumbeat of communications all the way through the launch, and we need to try different channels. But I think we certainly, and the manager of the advocacy team is doing some work at the moment to establish some of those links with very established and newer community groups to understand what they're doing and how they might help to promote the offer. But I think it's got to be one channel among many.
Okay, so just picking up on that, Joe, how confident are you that all the households in the affected area will get to know they can apply for this wellbeing grant, particularly those households which will be the majority, which haven't actually participated so far in it?
Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Hammond. And I think that there's an element of that which we will get through kind of door knocking, through word of mouth. We are talking, in fact, we had a meeting of the implementation steering group last week where we talked about kind of a newsletter with resident input and other ways that we might kind of help to spread the word. I think the key there will be to start to look at that 500-metre area in a slightly closer way. So to look, there are, it won't surprise you to know, lots of very, very affluent households in that area who may need the support but may well not need the support. But I think we can certainly focus some of those initial efforts on our estates, in other social housing and in other areas where we've heard through intelligence from the implementation steering group we need to focus. So I think it will be gradual and it will take time, but particularly over that first 6 months I think we should be able to establish a really good network of communication so that people are getting those messages and understand what they're entitled to.
And when will you know to be able to come back to us and tell us what portion of them?
Absolutely. So one of those basic kind of figures on reach and to some extent impact will be available after that first quarter of reporting. So I think in spring next year we will have some information for you about the kind of progress we've made. I would have thought 6 months in we'll have a much clearer picture of how many people we've reached and where we might be missing people as well.
Right. The other questions I had, which led up to that, were very articulately answered by Councillor Gardner and Councillor Simmons, so I don't need to ask them. But the other is more of a comment actually. I rather like the EST's response to the council recommendation in Appendix 3, where they were seeking an overarching narrative as well as the activities in the list. And I think for me that goes to the part of organisational culture. If you can do a narrative at that point, I think it would actually be really quite helpful. I think it's probably a narrative to cover Appendix 2 is what I meant. But I like that comment, and I would also take that forward into the next iteration of this. But otherwise, thank you very much for the paper.
Chair, just one very quick question, if I may, and what the answers have been given. But on page 7, 4.8, the first sentence says, given the relatively low response rates, I wanted to know why, given that this is the immediate group that in fact a lot of studies on the response rate of these.
Thanks. There were different views. It was relatively low, so we had, I think, we heard from several hundred people, but in the context of kind of 5,500 households, that is a relatively small number. It was not low compared to kind of standard council consultations. It was a decent response rate in that respect. We did reflect in some of the earlier papers to the Open Scrutiny about why that might have been the case, and I think we actually have heard since from people that people thought that it wasn't a consultation for them, which I think speaks to some of the concerns about exclusion that people within that immediate community have felt, that they've assumed that the support was for bereavement survivors, whereas actually this was directly for them. And one of the positive things about the implementation group is that we've got people who didn't participate in the consultation and who have joined since. But I also think there was a degree of kind of consultation and engagement fatigue. People weren't quite sure what they were going to get out of it. But I know Councillor Simmons will have her own reflections on why we didn't manage to reach as many people as we would have liked through that initial consultation, which is why we then redoubled our efforts in this next phase to engage people in making some of those choices that we needed to make to finalise them all.
Chair. Sorry, before you go on, may I sort of add to that answer? Because I think it's important. I think in discussions and in previous scrutiny meetings, in response to that question, there has also been the aspect mentioned that a lot of people have disengaged because of how they have felt their relationship with the council has been, and also because of the 7 years of neglect, I would say, for want of a better word. So I think that's another layer to why that response rate is so much lower than it is with bereaved survivors who have had strong engagement from the start.
Yeah, and indeed, thank you, Councillor. When we started the bereavement survivor provision, we would have had similarly low consultation rates. And I think we have to be able to show part of building trust is by delivering. And here, through this consultation, through the work on the inquiry, I think we're at a stage where we're recognising the need that exists in that immediate community in a different way from the way we have before, and we're able to connect with people in a different way. And so to Councillor Hammond's question, as we go on year, we should expect both consultation feedback and access and uptake of these services to increase as people build their confidence in our commitment to deliver. And if it doesn't, that's when we know that we aren't delivering the right things in the right way and aren't reaching people. But the trajectory was positive through bereavement survivors, and we need to follow that.
And just to Councillor Benson's point, I think there is also there's an extent to which there are some people who called up, particularly after the consultation was finalised, and said, right, I'm ready to access some of this support. I'm really excited about it, but obviously we have had a little bit more work to do to finalise that model. So I think there is interest beyond those who have responded to the consultation in what this programme might be able to do.
Well, some aspects of my question have been answered, but if you could please expand on the role of the advocacy group or perhaps corporate community support team, and what the envisaged outcomes are going to be and how they will be measured and what time frame we're talking about.
Thanks, Councillor Mascal. And yeah, we will, so alongside the kind of routine reporting to the new independent scrutiny function once a quarter and to this committee twice a year, we will make sure we've put forward some suggested indicators which we can bring to the next committee meeting about what sorts of things to measure. The team will have a particular focus on housing and health issues. We can envisage they'll support other things as well. We are looking at the moment at designing a case management system so that we can make sure that actions are tracked and followed through, so you can get a sense of what kind of issue has been raised and whether it was satisfactorily resolved for somebody. I think the team envisages doing quite a wide range of different kinds of work. So in some cases where people need it, some quite intensive casework. In others where people just need the right door to knock on, probably some signposting and some referral. So I think it will vary quite a lot. It's another area I think where we will learn quite a lot through the first 6 months of the provision. So at the moment we're trying to go in with a clear set of parameters, which we've discussed with the implementation steering group. But I think we will regularly review that depending on how it's working. There is a possibility that the team will be overwhelmed with demand. There's also the possibility that actually people won't come forward. So I think we just need to keep an eye both on the reach and on the kind of impact and outcomes that we're achieving through that team.
Can I give a supplementary on that, on that? In for younger people, maybe I'm chairing FCS, so we're focusing on the up to 18. In that age group, the delivery mechanisms that are workable are very different from term time to holiday time, particularly in summer. And so will the advocacy that you envisage actually have the ability to switch deliveries mechanisms, and then that is even more complicated when it involves interventions, early interventions involving the NHS or whatever. So there'll be more than one partner maybe through different delivery places and a lot of communities according to when it's.
I think the majority of the focus of the support for children and young people, particularly those under 18, will be delivered through the education and training aspect of the restorative justice programme, which will focus on people in and outside of schools through the hub, through direct support to them. The advocacy team, no doubt, will end up doing whole family work and supporting in that space. But I think they'll be much more focused on, mental health issues as an adult will be facing.
And just, I think the whole of the advocacy team is coming out of the dedicated service. There's still the dedicated service. There's been a restructure, so they're highly skilled and knowledgeable. So I think they would be really effective and will really help residents in a way that perhaps others can't, because just their knowledge working in that community. Thank you. That's reassuring. Pretty.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have been answered, but just on page 5, it's point 3.6. Now it's all going back to the point that Councillor Gardner, Councillor Youngson made about communication and consultation. This numbers that you represented in 3.6, is it out of the 5,500 households?
So that's across both the bereaved survivor cohort and the immediate community. So
right, yeah. Okay, so we're still talking about 5,500 households.
Yeah, and in addition, a specific cohort of bereaved survivors, which I think is about 500 adults.
Right. Okay, so if you take that number, then it's a pretty good response. But still, for the rest of it is okay. So and from what you said, you're pretty confident now that the improved communications, hopefully you'll get a better response.
Yeah, I think, The only other slight clarification to that is those numbers also include the children we consulted with who go to the schools in the 500 metre area. So the numbers, you can't quite add them up and sort of put them as a percentage of 5,500 to equate. Each one was assessed on their own merits, which is why the report is clear, where we could see a percentage was lower than we might have liked for understandable reasons that we described. So I would probably advise against amalgamation.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And one thing, and maybe I might have missed it, how will you collect the data of, to actually measure how effective everyone is and all the different departments? So how will you collect that data?
So for the immediate community support, we're in the final processes of designing a case management system which captures that sort of information. So for the advocacy team, it will capture, as I said, kind of actions, follow up. It will track things to resolution or non-resolution. And we've also created a system that can support the gym membership applications and the wellbeing grants, with some follow-up, which we've discussed with the implementation steering groups, and questions about how the grant helped people, and to the point that's been raised already, whether a different level of grant would have offered a different kind of different level of support to a household of a particular size. So we're building that into, it's always difficult to measure kind of outcomes and impact in this space. We've had some helpful steer from the external scrutiny team. We've put forward some suggested indicators, the sorts of things we'll be able to record, and they've given us some feedback. So we're just adapting our plans. And I'd hope at the next committee meeting that even if we didn't have the latest data, we would be able to show you exactly what we'll be measuring through the new programme. But as ever, I would just say I think it will be a question of keeping an eye on the model and allowing it to evolve, and establishing, to the point that's been raised tonight, if we've got very small take up, is that because the offer's not attractive, because we're not communicating it properly, or because it's not working for people in some other way?
Yeah. And as ever, it's the balance between data that you can collect automatically without any council investment to do so beyond the systems that's built, and when people are beginning to use a service, they have to request and share their feedback from previous times, but also trying to design a system that still gives you some of that qualitative feedback that we know is adds to the richness of the flavour that we can show.
Thank you. Portia, so do you mind if I ask a question now?
Oh, yeah. Oh yes, thank you, Chair. After you or?
Well, I might go.
Okay.
I would ask what a sense-making session was in 5.2. I probably should know, and it's probably described somewhere and I missed it.
That's the EST's language, not mine. That's the real. But
I was okay to curl my lip in school, and I was asking in the sense of wanting to know.
No, but I'm just saying. So my explanation might not be spot on, but I think the idea is that through the regular quarterly reporting, we will be sharing information with the independent scrutiny function about the reach, impact and delivery of the programme. The sense-making sessions really are about the independent scrutiny function bringing together bereavement survivors for that programme and the immediate community for that programme, and us to look at what the data is showing and essentially to make sense of what it might mean. Does it suggest, to the conversation we've been having this evening, that we're not kind of reaching the right people, or that we're massively oversubscribed and need to rethink the approach to something? So it's a way of collectively interpreting what the data has to say and asking questions that might then lead to changes in approach.
Sounds very sensible. We've talked in other meetings about how we interact with our with people as a whole in the council, and how we still can't people still can't track their own complaints and stuff, and obviously we're moving towards all of that in the future. Are we going to try, as we set out on this journey, to have a much more user-friendly way of handling cases so people can check up on how? So we were talking about somebody raises a question, how it's answered, and tracking all of that, a bit of self-service along there for people if they want it.
Yeah, I think definitely there's learning within the programmes that we are running and are going to be running. There's learning across the council in terms of where we've got systems that are enabling residents to be able to see that, but also ensuring that staff are completing that so that so if someone calls up, we know where they are. There's probably progress to do in terms of the broader customer access programme in terms of its rollout more broadly, but I feel positive that the council understands that challenge and we've got elements of good practice.
Thank you. When are we going to have? There was mention in 5.3 of the measurements that are going to come. When is the next report? Probably I should know this, but can you remind me?
So it will be probably sooner than you think. I think we're looking to come back in the spring, and that will be. I hope then we'll have some initial data from the programme, but we'll also have some of the kind of full range of indicators.
So March.
Yeah.
Right. One final question from.
Oh, I think it's about two, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'll be quick. I just wanted to know the restorative justice programme that you run in the sports centre. What percentage of those suggestion and advice is taken on board from the local residents that have their input? That's number one. And two, what initiatives have you put in place for those children who are in school then and now they're into their adulthood? I mean, a disruptive way of life.
Respond to those two quickly.
Thank you. So you did, difficult to say on the percentage of feedback that was responded to. What we did have, difficult to answer that question directly, but what we did have was 4 separate phases of the consultation. And that first phase was really about gathering some very wide feedback about people's experience, including in some cases very painful experiences from the early days, and then starting to talk about what people might value, both with people making suggestions, and then in the later stages, we put forward some models on the basis of what we had heard, and people had the opportunity to agree or disagree with some of the suggestions we've made. So I would say what we've ended up with is entirely driven by what we heard through those phases of consultation. But in between the stages, we had the opportunity to kind of put forward some different models and allow people to agree or disagree with them. And sorry, your second question was
on the education. So it definitely at KEA, I can't remember if it was at Holland Park and also as well, but there was tracking in the early days of where people were, like people's futures and horizons for children who were leaving, young people who were leaving KEA. There probably was a gap, I think, in terms of how effectively that was managed. When we've done this consultation and some of the other consultations, we've worked with KEA to try and contact people who've left the schools in the past, to try and reach out and sort of understand where they are and what their support needs might be now. Within the restorative justice programme, there are specific offers now in place for that cohort of people, that 18 to 25, to really make sure that we can try and catch up. But I think we have acknowledged in previous meetings that there is a slight gap there in the past.
Thank you. I think we've had a very good discussion probing, reassuring ourselves about this programme. I think there are a couple of recommendations. One, I think, raised by Claire, is that should there be any sense in which their resources are limiting the activities, that should be included in any report that comes before us, and we wouldn't want to hear about it afterwards. We'd expect that to be in regular reports to the OC. And then, Greg, you were talking about the issue of the overarching narrative and how that's something that we should aspire to. Can you articulate that better than me? The recommendations.
Well, the committee agreed with the EST's request for an overarching narrative to cover off the list of activities and dependencies.
So we'd encourage you to make sure that that happens. Is that
something along those lines? Yes. If I had a big pen in front of me, and
I might crafted it beautifully, I'm sure.
And just quickly on that point, Councillor Wheel, there is, and I think the paper mentions this, but there is quite a big interface with the council's response to the public inquiry report, where indeed there has been some attempt to set out, at least initially, what that vision might look like. But we agree that there's more work to do there, and so this was published before that response, which was published last night for the full council meeting next week. But I think they should very much be read together, and we'll do some work before leadership team to bring that together more effectively.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming and presenting that and listening to a barrage of questions. It's a full meeting today. There's no limit. So we're now going to move to the revenue account financial and publishing report. Thank you everybody from the Johnny, maybe you want to enjoy and maybe you're enjoying the alert.
I'm here for the paper.
I know it's painful to speak, but is there anything you want to draw to our attention, or can you make us notice?
Yeah, I mean, I can perfectly see that you might start feeling a bit repetitive at these meetings when they present these monitoring reports.
Every time you manage to add a nuance and new point of interest.
I think it gets worse and worse every time. No, I think broadly speaking, it's a similar picture to previous quarters. TA is still the major pressure. There are still some modest might be the wrong word. There are still some pressures that concern me, but that are modest in scale compared with the TA pressure in my resources directorate. ASC still in balance. I think the notable changes that for the first time we were reporting are slightly more significant than before, overspending family and children's. And that's essentially related to replacement, which is very expensive. So what it shows is that the kind of pressures that we've been managing, that we've kind of talked about at previous meetings, are now starting to show in our accounting. I think that's quite difficult to smooth because you can just have a single case that costs £500,000 or whatever it is. But that's essentially probably the biggest movement. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take questions from everybody. Please.
Okay. Okay, Chair. I have a quick one on your page 41. It's the table 4.
Yeah.
Sorry, point 15.2. The Cent Transport, there was a saving of 300,000.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, again, to be on the percentage term, how much saving was that before we had the Queensville School? Any idea?
Sorry, can you ask?
Yes, point 15.2.
Yeah.
Where we talk about the saving of roughly 300,000. And since having Queensville School, there's been a saving. And how does it compare to how much we used to spend before?
We were spending the whole budget and probably more on SEN transport. We can get you absolute numbers. If that's helpful, definitely.
Right. Okay. I think. Yes, I think that was. Thank you.
I wanted to refer back to the minutes by me, which Johnny, you accepted the proposition that all future reports should have a transformations outcomes section in future financial reports. Now, in this table, transformations are mentioned in 1.10 on page 31, 1.11, and then 30.4 on page 80. Basically, they're not followed up in any of the sections. The opposite has happened in page 6, which follows, which we won't go into depth now. Basically, that does set out in some detail as to the role and outcomes and ambitions of the transformational process. My question is as to why this paper has not taken the approach and followed it through in the departmental areas in the way that was envisaged, the recommendation that was accepted by you in our previous meeting.
It's a fair question. I think there is still it has been difficult to, I think, land that with across departments. I think I'm still in the process of trying to land that successfully. I think in some papers, for example, the draft budget that we're consulting on, I literally went back and rewrote sections to include transformation and then asked for officers to buttress it where necessary. So that cultural piece in terms of what officers think about it first is something that I think we're still in the process of getting right. So your challenge is welcome because it reinforces that.
It's particularly a challenge because I know in the subcommittee of this committee that I chair, FCS, I know that these transformational pieces were happening and they're being reported on us in FCS. The FCS section in this paper doesn't actually reflect what we have received.
I think my sense of the straight answer is that there are officers who are really stretched across lots of different work streams and they're not yet thinking laterally enough in terms of presenting the information in the way that you're describing. I'm happy to present it in a more sustained way with transformation.
I'd like to be perhaps more supportive than I have been in my fashion so far and say that I think we should actually reinforce the stream, Chair, with a recommendation. The previous recommendation was agreed to is actually followed up in further papers and given sufficient resource to actually come out in the papers. It's all very well to have a piece of shelfware in terms of an agreement to the recommendation, but not if it doesn't get followed through in future reports. That was the whole intent of it. If it was going to be impossible to do, or take time for the coffee to be smelt, or for time for people to be trained, or given the IT, or smelling the coffee, or whatever it happens to be, in culture change, then that should have been given as a caveat to acceptance of the recommendation in the first place. I think if we can do it in the report 6, and we can't do it in report 5, it strikes me that we now need to make a recommendation to reinforce what we had before. So, Chair, I propose that we have a recommendation that says that the previous work is actually carried, as agreed, to carry
We're
out.
bringing Lisa before you said you wanted to.
Yeah, so just want to add a bit of context. So we've had conversations internally about transformation in this paper in particular. And we are going to be redesigning this paper slightly for next year. So we will make sure that all of the transformation is really picked up in that. I think there is a culture change in here at the moment. You know, we're following the same sort of format every quarter. And we're committed to actually looking at that next year to make sure we wrap up all of that. And I think we're on that journey. So you see a bit in there. You will definitely see transformation in the budget papers that you've already seen, and the next budget paper that's coming in February. And you'll see some in the select committees over the coming weeks. But I think it's a sort of journey to get to that point. But we haven't not heard what you've said. It's just taken us a bit of time to get there.
So the recommendations that were accepted out of the budget working group this time last year, or not this time, sorry, but February last year, are taking longer to bring into effect than was envisaged by all of us, including ourselves, in February last year, because it was very clear transformation program had to be set out by the end of the financial year.
I think we're noting that it's taken longer than we wanted, but we have Lisa's reassurance that we're on that trajectory to produce.
Sorry, Chair, I can't accept that because we've already had a nearly year slippage within a year. So I think this needs sharpening up in terms of this committee a bit more. Otherwise, the work that's been done previously is just going to be let slip aside. But I think we need to put a bit more edge to this and put a requirement from this committee that the reports that come through. I mean, if what's going to happen in the budget round from now till January is going to have this in it, maybe that's the recommendation that we should make now. Ensure that the officers ensure that the full explanation of the outcomes of transformational work is embedded in the financial reports coming through on the budget round.
Yeah, I mean, and I've accepted, I think, what you said up to a point. I would say there was a full commentary on transformation in the actual budget papers, which are the forward-looking piece. It's true that I would have liked there to be a section in monitoring reports that reflect on the success and where transformation has and hasn't worked. But equally, I think, that is starting to come through. If you look at the draft budget, there is significantly more. I should know because I spent a lot of time poring over it.
I think a simple recommendation, Chair, would be that we ask the team, lead member and the officers to ensure that what's been said is actually in place. It's probably before Christmas and certainly before January. There's a full analysis of outcomes of transformational work embedded in the budget reports. But that would make it very simple. It recognises there's been difficulties, achieves what we need for this year's budget round, and it means that we don't get a year's slippage in this process.
Well, I don't think we're getting slippage. I mean, really, what
slippage? We've already in slippage from what was agreed.
Because I know everyone else got lots of questions. Well, Lisa, do you want to?
So you will see, and you'll see on the next report on the agenda, there is some stuff in there for resources on chief execs, and all of the other documents for the other select committees are following the same process. So I think what you're asking for is coming in those future reports.
Chair, very simply, I would like to recommend that this committee makes a recommendation that that process is ensured for this budget round in the papers that will come in the budget proposal. That's a very simple proposal for the recommendation. Are we prepared to make that?
Well, that's fine.
Because we make that recommendation, so it's minuted.
I don't know how many times I've said it, but yes, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Shall we move on to you?
Two quick questions. The first one is on temporary accommodation and what we're doing to calculate that also the root cause. And the second question on page 51, resources, customer delivery, some explanation of the overrunning it out to expand the fact that we're doing some work on it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In terms of TA, as we said before, it's probably the biggest revenue pressure in London. What are we doing? It's probably a combination of two things. One is the prevention work that we're doing, which is trying to reduce the number of households in hotels and bed and breakfast and things, because A, they're expensive, but also they're quite transient forms of accommodation that they're built kind of. I grew up in one. It's not a great way to grow up if it has to be helped. The flip side of, okay, you're trying to prevent people from moving into those sorts of accommodations, and how are you either developing or acquiring accommodation that can house those people? That's harder. I suppose one strand is developing, which is the New Homes Programme, which has made lots of progress, but is not probably where any of us in this room would have liked it to be, because of sort of a variety of factors, which probably would be a bit of a rabbit hole to go down. The other side of it is acquisition. I think the challenge with that is that borrowing costs have increased, which means that our capacity to borrow in order to acquire property has reduced. There are innovative models we can look at, so potentially private financing or pension fund investment, which I think has been discussed in the investment committee a few times already, and that would be a really good way to navigate some of the challenge. The final piece that I can refer to is the growth in the budget. So if you look at the draft budget proposals that we brought a few weeks ago, there's 2.5 million extra in, which is easily the biggest growth in the council. It may be that we need to increase it by more still, but it's a recognition that it's a growing pressure. And then in terms of resources and customers, I think there are a few separate overspends in the Q2 report, which is something that I don't think is acceptable, and we shouldn't be overspending in this directorate. There are, in some cases, reasons for that. So, for example, right-sizing parts of the DD&T department, which is a relatively new department. I'm not wholly satisfied with that as an explanation, but I recognise that it is something that makes life more difficult for the department. In other areas, some of the things that we're doing require quite specific expertise. So if you're recruiting for an agency role to do with the CRM, those are relatively specialised roles. And therefore, if you have someone leave at short notice, for example, the agency cost might be a bit, or the contractor cost might be a bit higher. I mean, we could go through the sort of line by line, but essentially, I think that kind of covers the broad piece of what's happening in the directorate. You want to
just raise one thing, so you might want to bring me on this as well, which is you will see that there is a delay in the soft facilities management. It's a paragraph 19.5. That contract has now been concluded and will deliver savings. So that's explaining the difference.
Yeah. So the re-procurement of the soft facilities management, which is essentially cleaning and security, took much longer than we expected. And that's because when we did our we had originally intended to go out for one contract for both of those services. But actually, when we did our soft market testing, it transpired that we would save more money and it would be more efficient if we had two contracts, one for cleaning and one for security, because you end up having one contract and managing another, and you're kind of 2 arms lengths from it. So we had to revisit all of our requirement specification documents, and that the procurement took much longer than we expected. I would say it has paid off because we have achieved that £450,000 saving, even though we haven't made it in year because it's taken us longer. And actually that's in the context of inflationary pressures around that kind of budget as well. So I think we're very happy with having secured good value going forward for cleaning and security, but it did take us longer than we expected, and that meant the saving in year hasn't been achieved.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to follow up the first of Sydney's questions and actually picks up on the lead member's introduction. And it wasn't for the London-wide problem with TA. I think there'd be a lot more focus on the DD&T overspend. I think it would be flashing red, it would be the thing we were talking about, but we've got this London-wide TA problem going on, and I think you've answered. You certainly started an answer to the question of what are we doing to get on top of the situation. There was one specific thing, and I don't want to go back over old ground, but there seemed to be a very large bill for Microsoft for Azure, and I don't actually understand what that was. But is this some unexpected bill that we have to pay software, or
additional 550,000?
It was rather a lot of money in the context of the council the size. Please.
So these are Microsoft Azure contract costs, and it relates to the platform. We need to support all of the users and the licenses. If it wasn't an additional bill, it was just that we didn't have sufficient budget in place to cover the cost in the first place.
That's quite depressing, isn't it?
So it's quite a large misestimate, if that's not the right word, underestimate on.
So there are two things. We've right-sized the budget now, so we won't have a problem in 25-26. Also, when it came to the point of contract negotiation with Microsoft, we were offered the opportunity to pay ahead, I guess, to save money in future, so to prevent further increases on the contracts.
And that's why we've got this extra bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're in a relatively weak position though, aren't we? Because if all of our, and that's not really a mitigation because we have to budget correctly, but I suppose by way of context, obviously if we're using Teams, Copilot, etc., and all of the council systems operate in that way, if Microsoft come and hike their fees, then we're vulnerable to that. And that's more or less, we pay for licenses.
Yeah.
I suppose we could move to Amazon Web Systems or something, and
open source.
I mean, there are alternatives, but obviously that's a kind of a big strategic decision about how the council wants to operate, and the moments at which we're kind of paying fees is not it's not the best time to be trying to make a strategic choice about how we want the council to operate. So it's not something I'm relaxed about, but it's quite a difficult thing to manage at the moments at which it arises.
Okay. The other point I was going to make, because this is a repeat paper in a way, it'll be a repeat point. There's still
and the 106.
But I'm going to make it anyway. There's still
the still and the 106. Is it not?
No, it is on. It's on Borough Sill, not 106.
Yes, still and 106.
The 106. I'm liking the fact that you're using it at last. But the Borough Sill was £33 million sat in there, and just quite a lot of improvement projects out there in the borough, not least Gloucester Road South. My wards, there's Hogarth Road, going on in Earls Court. There's all sorts of projects like that, streetscape projects, which are classic improvement.
They are.
And it strikes me that Borough Sill's sat there and not being used, and every 3 months we see it, and it's grown slightly.
Well, so there are a few things I guess. One is that I'm pleased that you're such a big supporter of the Streetscape programme, and obviously many schemes already, like Eve Street in your ward and Draper Avenue, which are underway in BHP. I could probably go around the table in almost every ward there'll be something in trains. So that's something that we should be proud of around this table.
Not funded by the council, but
no, but nevertheless, where we have acted as we undertook the consultation and have overseen the works. I think in terms of how we're allocating the money, there is sufficient money in the parking reserve to fund a number of these schemes year on year, which is obviously how schemes like Hogarth Road are being taken forward. Gloucester Road South, I very much enjoyed starting the design work with you and the team at Portfield on. I think in terms of Borough Sill, what we said before is that in the past I had wanted to kind of retain at least some of it in order to help us finance priority projects that came up at short notice. So had we, for example, been in the happy position of being able to acquire Notting Hill Police Station, it would have been to the council's benefit to have a floor of Borough Sill that was available that could be deployed quite quickly, that wouldn't make us a hostage to potentially high borrowing rates. I think the thing that's happened more recently that has kind of maybe exacerbated what you're alighting on as a concern is that because the borrowing situation has got worse, we're seeking to deploy Borough Sill to offset borrowing on projects that we have in the programme. I suppose with the timelines, and that I would have thought that over the next 12 months that Borough Sill figure will go down, because I would expect us to be deploying Borough Sill to offset borrowing that's kind of previously assumed within the capital programme rather than non-proactive new projects.
Well, I would certainly hope to see that go down rather than the borrowing go up, but the interest rates that we've got at the moment
exactly
likely to come down.
So I'm hoping, and I think that's a question of phasing of works. If we're here in a year's time and it hasn't gone down at all, then perhaps I'll have been wrong. But I take this opportunity to reissue the kind of the steer, but I think that's kind of where we're trying to direct it.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you. 2 points. The underspend in audit, in particular internal audit, and for me, this is a concern because actually I think one of the comments that came out during the Grenfell inquiry was the discussion that actually internal audit has a bigger role to play in terms of going ahead. So extra scrutiny through internal audit. And so for me, this is a step in the wrong direction. And I think it also comes up in the budget paper. So for me, I've put that down as a real marker that that is not something we should be underspending on. We should be doing more of it. My second question is on DD&T, which I had also flagged. Can I ask, first of all, why isn't cross-departmental work being accepted by departments in terms of funding? And question, is this essentially, it's 19.4, is this essentially a spend to save and therefore should come out of, for example, a contingency fund that is, this is money that's being invested in order to provide savings?
Okay. Do you want to cover audit first?
So audit is very much around vacancies within the team. I think they're still on schedule to do the work schedule.
I think it talks out. You not talk about less use of external consultants to do.
So we're using less external, but we're growing our team in-house to have the spaces in-house, but also we've got a number of apprentices in the audit team as well. So we're growing our own because these are quite difficult posts to fill. So the underspending the internal audit is 79,000. And as you say, it's a spend on contracted out activity is working. So it's a combination of the two.
So to me, if you're growing your internal team, then potentially you should still be using your external consultants until you bring your juniors up to do the job.
I think it is a transition between the two. So I think it's sort of moving down in the use of external as we bring people on board. And there's been not the full complement of staff for the whole year. So it's the equivalent of probably 2 posts for a whole year. It's quite a lot, isn't it, level?
Yeah.
But David assured us before that we were on track with the schedule of works. I can take away and ask more questions for you.
Yes. So as you know, in order we do have both fixed and flexible timelines for internal audit projects. And so I look at it and go, why aren't we doing more internal projects?
We think it'd be helpful to have more information on that, because I agree it's a concern.
It does also refer to the board team as well, so it's across both the duties. Yeah.
DD&T and recharges. I mean, I guess my sense is that departments don't want to own the pressures, and that's a challenge probably in any organisation. And in order to sit in front of me in good conscience, I need the moral authority to say that I've been whiter than white and absorbed the pressures and also made the largest savings possible, transformation and savings. I think that's...
So how do you get departments to own it? Or is it essentially spend to save, and therefore there is a centrally allocated element that helps people to absorb that cost or stand up and say, yes, I'll do that, and centrally you'll help pay for it.
Yeah. So this year, and there's been a change in some of the accounting rules of what we can do. So in the past, we've been able to capitalise a lot more of digital spend because we're now using the cloud a lot more. We don't own an asset, so therefore we can't capitalise it. So therefore it has to come from revenue budget. That's sort of come out during the year as we've got underneath some of the projects. So we're in it's a transitional year, I would say. So what's happening is we've got a number of projects being undertaken by the digital team on behalf of the services across the council. As you've seen already from the table 1 in the report, that's the spend for those departments. We could move the spend from digital to the department. Digital will then have an underspend, the department will have an overspend. So overall, it's not going to change the bottom line this year. We are working on this at the moment, and actually there's a paper coming to an internal EMT meeting next week about how we what's the position we get to? Is it digital incur the costs? Is it the department incur the costs? Do we have to make sure there's available budget? Well, this is yeah, which is a bit.
I mean, this is something that Darren was talking to me about this week, I think, in our catch up. I think DD&T being a slightly newer department within the council, and also having initially been set up through use of reserves, is slightly now in a position where it is outspending its kind of conventional budget, and also probably doesn't have the I suppose it's the internal reputation internally and the institutional head to kind of robust some of that. And so I think it's sort of in a process where I think it needs to slightly become more robust about that, because and this is true. I mean, Sophie, we were talking about, you have a nightmare trying to get recharges out of London. So there is a structural challenge in this, because we are challenging departments to make a larger number of transformation and savings than they want to make. And this would be a means of increasing what they have to do. Now, if you look at the draft budget proposals, resource and customer delivery has delivered the largest number of transformation and savings of any department. And that's because I've challenged the team to have that moral authority when we go to colleagues and say, actually, we are taking some strain, but we need you to work with us. And I think DD&T is at the sharp end of that, where it has those kind of structural factors in terms of being a new department, and also has some cross-departmental recharging pressures. It's not a particularly happy answer, but it's honest.
Thank you. My questions are to do with page 97, which is the general fund budget savings. And I just have to take a quick one. Given the staff savings on allocation account, which is the PK, just, I don't know, hopefully you can answer this, but just understanding that won't have an impact on the kind of quality and timeliness of service delivery, given the demands in AOC at the moment. And then the second question was just on kind of contingency planning. I was looking at AOC here, given they're all marked as achievable, sort of what contingency plans on place in sort of what we're assuming prevention initiative success and demand reductions do not materialise as expected.
So page 97 is a list of all of the savings that are in the budget for this year and any that have been planned for this year. And also it's just social care assuring us that they can achieve, as you can see, which is why they were marked green. And from that, they're not identifying anything that will have an impact on service delivery. And what we are doing with services is very much saying that you can't deliver anything that's listed here. Please try and find something else before you say you can't deliver it. And you'll see that in some of the other elements of this. But at the moment, they're certainly not saying there'll be any impact. But I guess that's probably a question you can ask at the select committee when you're in detail people there to answer.
And then anything on thank you.
If savings aren't achieved, state contingency. I mean, I don't think there's specific contingency in terms of identified savings, but there's a contingency budget. That's kind of the short answer.
And again, the first ask is can services find an alternative saving? But the council will always set budget contingency to cover things that aren't there or when we set a budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke about this maybe I'm getting my meetings mixed up, but there have been conversations about whether when we set a budget, we should plan more than 100% of the necessary savings in order to have the kind of contingency that you're talking about. And I think what I've said at previous meetings is I don't think the organisation is ready for that. I think departments are still too resistant to making transformations and savings. I think you can see it culturally in some of the questions that we'll raise, but also in practice when you look at some of the savings. Were we in a stronger position, and were some of the gap, I say stronger position in relation to the kind of journey we're on around transformation and savings, and were we in a stronger position in terms of kind of smaller budget gaps, that it would be a good thing to do, I think, in principle. But I don't think this is a moment at which we can do that because the pressures are so great.
Thank you. I was wondering about point 17.4. I'm following on the TA aerospace. I read this right. Then we are actually forecasting, I think it's 4 million 4.42 million over. Excuse me. And I think that you said that in the budget proposals, we're looking at 2.5 million growth there. And I'm just sort of wondering whether that's adequate.
Well, I think the real answer is that we don't know yet whether it was adequate, but there's a balance to strike in terms of the signals we send to the organisation. I think given that we're not yet at the kind of decision point of the cycle, and given that we should always be pushing ourselves as an organisation to do more to mitigate some of the pressures, it's right that we are challenging the department. So the things I talked about in terms of prevention, I think there's lots of really good work happening, but can we do more? Probably. I think you can always do more. Can we train every senior even harder to acquire or develop new homes, find something innovative around pension funds or private financing? Sure, but I think if we put in 4.5 million now, the incentives in a large public sector organisation, they carry. And if I said, if we collectively gave the steer that 4.5 million is an acceptable growth in a single year, not only is that kind of completely out of proportion with growth in previous years for single causes, it would also completely disincentivize the kind of good work we want to do around prevention and kind of innovation around how you have the appropriate stock to manage the pressure.
Thank you. So in that spirit then, would it be possible for me to ask about the review of the delivery model for temporary accommodation? And could perhaps the Housing Community Scrutiny Committee have an update? At some point?
I'm not the I suppose I don't have any principal objections to that, but you would possibly
I'll be asking them.
Yeah, I mean, if the select committee are happy to do that in there.
Yeah, I think I need to go past that. And I think everything else I've had has been asked. So thank you, Toby.
Again, points of emphasis on firstly on TA. Just looking at the homelessness prevention grant in 17.6, and this list of sound like massive jobs work, but I mean how I don't know how that grant is going to cover, what it's going to cover, how we're going to be able to check in with these things. These seem like massive, like multi-department sort of ongoing, propositions. So my worry is that there's not much to measure, certainly for scrutiny in the sort of shortish term.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on that?
I think just to say, really, we are trying to really get underneath all of the housing data and modelling, etc. So we are trying to broaden that measuring. And certainly we've got plans and we've got conversations down here about what we think the future models might look like. So we're trying hard, but it is a little bit how long's a piece of string, we don't know what's going to present at that time, but we are trying to use backward-looking data to help us look forwards. Kojo, has got loads of data on all of that, which I'm sure will come out of the select committee again and ask those questions.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, again, I'll keep it a bit more brief, but libraries, it looks like what you're talking about in 15.8 is not an ongoing, or I'm worried about libraries. And because overspend, shortfall income, that sounds like it's relatively temporary. Am I right in thinking that? Is this something which should I be worried about libraries? Is really my question.
You can reassure Toby.
I can reassure you certainly about, give a commitment that the value of that I recognise. I think the council recognises the value that libraries have as community spaces and civic hubs, and that we obviously that we will always
libraries should be open.
Yes, this is what
in terms of the financing, libraries, are scarcely viable.
Yeah.
There's something that have to be cross-subsidized. That is categorically not the same as saying that because they're not financially viable, they should, they add a huge amounts of value to communities. They're a great thing. We've all used them. Probably anyone who's grown up here has spent time revising for tests and things in our libraries, and I'm no different. And borrowing books and children's, all these sorts of things. But then it is a structural challenge. And when you have a library that is temporarily closed due to a site issue that, on the one hand, I suppose you're saving on things like energy, but broadly speaking, that is a cost. So I don't have a huge amount of reassurance to give on the financial components of that. And I remember there are stories of kind of in other boroughs and apocryphal things about efforts to co-locate things, and if we can make it a site at which people do A, B, C, and D, then perhaps that will also trigger investment into the library from the public. I think that's a mixed success at best if you look at it regionally and nationally. So essentially, libraries are something that are retained because councils recognise they're a value-adding kind of wider terms than the financial perspective.
Yeah, we have had a couple of libraries we've been worried about in the last 20 years.
Can I just suggest this is about looking at the budget monitoring? So I think we ought to stick to that.
I think
I welcome you engaging with the leadership team about libraries at any other time, but I think we're looking at the monitoring here.
Understood. Okay, that was a response to.
So I'm keen to ask Portia if she's got a question.
Right. I do want to ask something about revised budgets, though. That's all right. Just my own understanding, because I'm kind of resident. A lot of financial talk. Am I right? When I'm looking at something that there's budget set and revised budget, and then that's mitigated from somewhere somehow, to whatever it is. It seems. Am I right that sort of considered? It's why there's a lot of it's what reserves it's okay to spend on and what isn't, and there's a lot of I think there's a lot of time when we're looking at budgets, when they're set originally, that we're often asking, what can reserves go to this, can reserves go to that. So I'm really wondering about the process of how I think you're nodding because you understand what I'm right.
Yeah. So revised budget. Obviously, we set a budget in February each year, approved by full council. From when we set that, we often then get additional grant income coming in, or we get clarification on some of the numbers from central government. So public health being prime example, it often comes after we've set the budget. So there's a timing issue here. So we set the budget at a point in time. Often we then make revisions for things that happen. So it might be a grant coming in late, it might be a grant coming in the year. It is also a transfer of contingency monies from the contingency budget into the service budget, and that's going to be for a number of reasons, including inflation allocated out once we know what that is. So moving from the central contingency pot into the service, or the pay award, which at the start of the year we hold centrally because generally we don't know what that will be, and that's been again the case this year. And it's things like that. Amanda, is there anything I've missed?
Yeah, I think a large amount this year was the investment in Oracle. That was around £10 million. That's like a big chunk of the movement.
Thank you. I want to follow up on that question and ask a bit about the governance of moving for revised budgets. So if you look at the bottom line of this budget, we're looking at a variance of 2 million. It's an overall variance of 30 million to the original budget. And that's seen particularly exemplified, for example, in housing, where it looks like we've got a 20% overspend, but in fact it's more like sort of 50% overspend of the original budget. And it's getting from that original budget to the revised budget. And where is that sort of I don't feel that that's clearly in the same way that the budget is monitored. I don't feel that move from the original to revised budget is monitored, and that you don't see where the money's coming to, you don't see the income side of it as well as you see the expenditure side here, although not very well tracked. We don't see the income side of it. I've explained that incredibly badly. You're very kindly nodding as if you know what I'm talking about, but if someone could respond to that.
Yes, we have a very detailed reconciliation sheet. And that's something that we can add as an appendix to future reports, if that would be helpful.
I think what might be helpful is that along with the quarterly budget monitoring would be a quarterly report on the change of the revisions to the budget in that quarter. And cumulative revisions to the budget so that we can see why we're doing it and how we're planning to fund it. Because my concern is that we revise budgets and then we use reserves to plug the gaps. And quite often, as you say, it's to do with extra income coming in, but it's also about extra unplanned expenditure that then has to be funded from reserves that we sort of don't it's like boiling the frogs, really. We just kind of get used to seeing the revised budget. So I think I'd like to see, my recommendation is that we have some improved governance. Well, not, I'm sure the governance is fine, but some improved reporting on revised budgets, just as we have reporting on outturn. It's part and parcel of the same.
We can absolutely do that. I think, we've done something similar around reserves and commitments at Appendix 4 to this report, so we can do something similar around.
But I feel
Should we be a bit careful? Or obviously, we're trying to add a section on transformation as well as a section on this. Are we sure we can do that? Is that?
So we've got.
We have it. Okay.
This is a lot easier to produce because obviously we know how we move from one number to the other. That's definitely a science, whereas the transformation, I would say, is probably a little bit more of an art because it's what people are planning to do and we don't always know. So I think this one is quite easy to commit to.
And I think it will just give us a sense of reassurance about those changes as we go along.
And I must say we have had that conversation with the EMT quite recently as well.
Sorry to rehearse
no,
that.
that's really helpful.
Could I suggest something? I don't know if it would make it easier if we were looking at revisions to budgets which include unplanned expenditure. And then things that have to do with the project being not completed in that period. We don't need to maybe do that well. So I think the concern is about the unplanned expenditure being brought from other places. What do you think, Mary?
So I think what you'll see, we do change from original budget to revised budget is why, i.e. is it from contingency or is it from a reserve? And then we can probably try and put a little bit of narrative behind any that are maybe high value or out of the ordinary. But a lot of the changes, I say, is around allocation of contingency and things like that.
I mean,
quite try and do some narrative on some of them.
And quite a few of the revisions that I see in here are not to do with unplanned expenditure. And I just thought if we don't have.
Well, let's see what I think the team understand what we're trying to get at. Let's see what you come up with the next time. And I'm sure if we think of anything else that we could add to that. So yes, if we could have a look at that at the next cycle, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, Nick, just from a couple of things. On page 54, I just want to make sure under the chief revenue, there was an overspend of the CCTV and the prevent and mortuary service. I'm assuming that was a one-off expense. It's quite a high expense, almost 180,000. Page 54. It's 20.4 last one. Just want to make sure there was a one-off expense. It was a one-off expense. Okay.
No, well, is it? I don't think it is. So the prevent overspend is an issue in regards to the fact that the central government have reduced to zero our prevent funding. And so we are running therefore with less money and we still have the same statutory responsibilities. So we have some funding in, we thought that we would get some money. And so we put some money in a reserve to be able to fund the service for this year and next. But we got less money than we thought we would. And there was some increased costs from our provision of delivery. So that is a gap. But there is a longer term consideration around how we're going to provide that prevent service, considering the government's reductions in funding overall.
So what we're really saying is the government should increase its funding.
Sorry. And just, the other thing, on page 63, I noticed that the Pembroke Road cost, it seems pretty high, 1 million, 24.2, page 63. Sorry, I should have said this earlier. Under the contingency reserve commitments, temporary depot cost, Pembroke Road, housing and social investment, 1 million. Why is that? Why is it so high?
I wish that were the end. I wish that was.
I'm sorry.
I wish that was the last of such costs.
Okay.
Shall I just come in on that
Yeah.
one, if I might, Chair? It's the lease cost for the site at Kensal and the site at Parsons Green that we are leasing whilst the work is being done. So
So it will finish, when does it mature?
well, the work has to. The work is going to take longer, so that is this year's pressure cost that we're reporting Q2. I don't know if we've quantified next year's yet, but I think there will be a further pressure next year.
This is going to be, I think, a medium-term pressure. I mean, I shouldn't say that because obviously I should be telling officers that we need to resolve it yesterday, and I would like us to have, but I mean.
Okay, and final break.
Yeah.
Page 83, 31.9. You talk about on the reserves. It's great, it's like manual. But then the last sentence says, however, this position is subject to change as the year progresses. By how much? Do we have any estimate?
I mean, it depends.
Does, yeah.
It depends on the commitments that we make and the changes to the program that happen in the end. So, for example, if that great happy thing of like a Notting Hill police station came in, then you might see a movement of, you know, X million without prejudicing a negotiating position. Equally, I suppose we could reduce our commitment to a project or reduce the budget envelope, I should say, associated with a project. That would also be a movement, but it kind of, that's a political judgment that gets made iteratively based on the, I guess, the context. So it's hard to be definite about that. I mean, I suppose you wouldn't want kind of wild jerks in the downward direction, in the sense that you wouldn't want to think, okay, we've given confidence to a project and we're now getting money away regularly by any means. But there may be occasions where budget envelopes change, they evolve, the scope of works, the design stage that a project is at, all of those things can influence how much we're going to draw down. And did so, there are new things. So again, I mean, another one would be like, had we liked the scheme at South Kensington Station, we had said that we might part fund the step-free access. Again, that would have been an example of a happy in-year movement towards delivering a project that we really like, but that would have shown up on kind of in that line. Well, that's how it would be reflected in a monitoring report, I think.
Thank you. Okay, shall we move on to agenda item A6? We've made a recommendation now with police reports. And I'm sure I'm more keen to take on this. So let's go on to item A6. So this is the paper that are the area under our influence, which will then contribute and feed up to the budget working group. So it's our comments and thoughts about the spending of this director. Johnny, do you want to introduce it?
Yes, I was just saying to Callum, I should take the credit for it while I can. To the extent there is transformation commentary in the assorted papers, this reflects at least some of the things that I wrote and asked officers to buttress. So I am glad it's in here, and I think similar commentaries in the draft budget papers. And my great wish as I sit beside, greater mindful and mine is that in future papers we have a similar focus on commenting on transformation. So to go directly to the points Will's been making. I think that was the only thing I had planned to say.
More of a puff than an introduction, but
yes, but one has to puff sometimes. Otherwise, you might forget all the hard work.
I'm going to start with Joanna and work that way, and then come back this way.
I just thought Jackie may want to say that there's a piece missing out of here, which seems to be in the housing papers.
The Housing and Communities Select Committee has in its budget paper the hard facilities management budget information.
That's because that's part of housing and property.
Yeah, but the select committee terms of reference don't quite align with services. So that's an error on my part, not finances. I haven't picked that up. So, but it is being scrutinised somewhere.
Possibly in the wrong place or
Yeah,
misaligned.
I had two questions. One is the whole Oracle, and as Amanda previously mentioned, that's already had a 10 million hit this year. My challenge is, given the previous experience where we tried to bring in a new system some years ago, which cost a fortune and was massively delayed, are the savings actually going to be deliverable in year? And are we going to have any more overspend on Oracle? And then I've got a second question. I'll let you answer that.
Well, I'll defer very quickly to officers. Like, the only thing I was, well, we had an update the last week or two that went to JLT and EMT, and I was greatly reassured because it was saying that right now that project is on time and within the budget envelope that you most recently have seen and that we have currently set within our programme. So I suppose the short answer is that based on the information we have available, the answer should be yes, it's deliverable.
Just to add to that, we are bringing paper to the next one of these meetings. I think it's the 19th or 18th December, which will give you an update on the Oracle project as well. Just finalising that.
Thank you. And my other question was on the Nottingdale equal work. So I see it's already had additional finance this year. And then there's a section, I think it refers to it in this report. And I was really, which seems to be a...
Where is this in the slide?
So it's
Yes.
here in the end of the paragraph, someone.
Yeah, I saw it.
It's the previous report. So the current spend was in, but I think there's a paragraph in this.
With this report, if could I,
Maxine,
you might just talk about helping a bit with the mapping, because I think you have a blizzard of financial information here tonight, and I think it's hard to work its way through. So the report that we've just done is the Q2 financial monitoring report, so telling us where we're up to in spend this year and the early spends and everything. The report that we're looking at now is the one that starts at page 111 and is the purpose of this is because the Open and Scrutiny Committee holds the budget scrutiny responsibility for resources and for the Chief Exec's Department minus communities, which sits with the select committee that Councillor Simmers chairs. So you've got quite a bit of background information in here because you've got kind of how savings are going so far, but essentially it's to scrutinise the budget, the proposals that that went to leadership team last week that you previously see, which is why some of this might look familiar, and which is out to consultation at the moment. But I think Nottingdale, which whilst it is is a really important matter for scrutiny, is not in the. I don't think, I might be wrong, Councillor Gardner, I don't think it's in
I've seen it too.
If you want to come back to it.
Yeah, why don't I'll leave you searching for it. Lucy.
I think mine was answered in the last book. Can I just check?
Great.
It was just to do with Microsoft Azure again, and it's not a kind of recurring overspend because you're saying that the large part was taken earlier.
And that will be in the budget next year.
That was what I was asking.
There's growth in the budget basically.
So it is recurring.
Yeah.
Yes,
There's
but
a
it,
bit of front loading
yeah.
to fix some prices or something.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah.
and appendix
So that
complaints that are coming up now, we probably previously wouldn't have seen to the extent that we're seeing them now. And I know as a avid Radio 4 listener, I was on there a lot of the time. So I think that's part of it. There are service failures in there, which are reported on in the appendix. In that we haven't responded on time in those areas all the time. So I think that has to be taken on board.
So I think in
and the quality as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think going on the appendix and looking at the Ombudsman report, the Housing Ombudsman report, it does seem actually originally not that badly compared to other landlords of similar size and type. So that's good. But when you look at some of the case studies there, and think about the impact of those failures or shortcomings on the actual residents, I think it might be, well, obviously I think this needs to kind of come to my committee as it's a separate specific housing thing. But there may be something there in terms of my layperson's suggestion, which may also apply to some of the other areas too. And I can't find it in the actual report, but I know it does say somewhere the corporate complaints team is a very small team. And when we look at some of the actions and recommendations from the Ombudsman, some of them do seem to represent quite significant pieces of work that would need resource. So my general concern, which applies specifically within housing in terms of service delivery and also complaint handling, but also may relate to the other service areas, is about resourcing and how we might feel whether or not those areas were adequately resourced, and if they weren't, what would be the mechanism for that up?
So, well, actually, I mean, the one of the actions that the organisation is putting forward in response to the public inquiry report is an end-to-end review of the complaints process that really looks at where there needs to be independence and some distance from a service, where we make sure there's oversight of that. So I suspect, we will have a number of views on where we could strengthen the process, some of which are in this report. But actually that process will really help us to start to crystallise some of those and could possibly look at the redistribution of resources across the organisation, but on the basis of that kind of framework that's presented through that public inquiry response. There was another point you made that I was going to respond to, but it's gone out of my head, sorry.
I think it was about the impacts on residents and the.
That's right. So I would say the case studies demonstrate, as you said, Johnny, we cannot afford to be complacent. Yeah. There is not enough consistent high quality practice.
And there's also a financial cost in terms of the ombudsman.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great that we're responding more swiftly now. People should have a response in time. I think we still need to work much better on the quality of our responses, because people should deserve a response first time around and not have to come back because we didn't get it right. And I think one of the themes that we pick out of this report is, yes, we're improving, but we've still got some way to go, certainly in the quality of our responses. And I think that's something that we will absolutely want to look at as part of this end-to-end review.
I mean, just to frame that, we should remember we only actually started having a complaints team in 2019. So actually it's something that we have done in the past, during the lifetime of this administration. And it's probably, that means that was the start of that journey, and we're only 5 years down from that. And we're still seeing quite rapid improvements. So hopefully it's something over time will continue to get better.
I think I brought the case to Sophie's attention today, because this is much about tone in the response as it is was a perfectly good response, but it lacked the right comforting tone to really make an apology work. And so that's something we've got to work on as an organisation.
Training, isn't there?
Yes, and I think this is a whole organisational challenge, isn't it? It's not for one team or one service to resolve. Every officer, very linked to the service standards, as you said, every officer has to internalise this and work it into their practice. And I think that's the challenge that we take on as an organisation over the next, coming months. And
I'm going to move on to Lucy because I'm conscious of the time and nobody has to ask a question.
I'm studying with Mary.
I thought you had. I could tell by your phone.
We actually spent half an hour on this on Monday, Portia and I. So I'm not going to ask any AFP questions because I've asked lots, but I was just interested where you talk about this further demonstrates that the first approach has not been implemented to full effect across directorate. Firstly, what is the phone first approach and how are you going to implement it across all departments?
So just call them before you blunder it.
I was just like, but
just give them a call. It's amazing how much you get to the real root of what their concern is, and what they want to hear back and what they're really looking for. And also you can have a conversation with them on the phone there and then if that's something that is not within our gift, but try to explain why and then follow it up with a response. And we've seen it where it has been implemented, an absolute drop in stage 2 escalations. Absolutely. I think we just need to keep working through the complaints network on that and kind of really promoting it just to do that.
So actually, when we've analysed the reasons for escalations to stage 2, actually evidence is that the reasons why individuals are escalating to stage 2 is because we haven't understood the complaint reasons at stage 1. So in order to tackle that, we, the process changes we're looking to implement is to get the first stage right, which is calling the customer and understanding the complaint from the offset.
And just generally, I guess from that, the sort of training that goes into sort of helping officers know how to deal with most likely very angry residents sometimes who sort of how to keep cool and have the right temperament, which is going to be a huge impact as to how they're going to be received by person who.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got some training that we're delivering out in addition to the service standards training around good conversations, and that really supports the service standards that we've rolled out. So we've done at first I think 5 or 6 sessions that's available for all staff across the council, and we'll be looking to see if we can extend that further, but that provides staff the right skills to be able to have those good conversations with residents who are complaining. It gives them all the techniques and skills, and it helps them embed the service standards.
Thank you. One very quickly,
and I'm just interested, when you're hiring people who are in the complaints team, are you looking for those traits? That I assume you are, that you're looking for very
there's a resounding yes. Excellent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that first. The rest you can learn.
Can I just ask, in 3.4, you talk about 851 complaints made accepted, of which 529 were because they were inquiries or there were service requests. Fundamentally, we must be going wrong. People either light on the website and they can't find how to get in touch with the department, so instead they complain. And I just genuinely think in your review you need to really look at that, because frankly that's a waste of everybody's time.
No, really. Sorry. Well, you can say.
I've got no.
Okay. Under the new complaints handling code came out earlier this year, and it gives a clear definition of what is a complaint and what is a service request. And in our current policy, it doesn't actually define what is a service request. So we will put that in. So it's really, really clearly defined. So I hope that will.
But I think also Joanna's point is that we need to learn from the misfires, from the service request, why they're coming in as a complaint. They're coming in as a complaint because they're not finding
very
right
accessible enough. I think that, absolutely.
Secondly, a question about the LBKC corporate complaints team. That doesn't strike me as very, it doesn't seem as if it's a general, I would question where you should rename yourselves. Because corporate doesn't look as if, doesn't look as if it looks as if it's.
And perhaps they can have a nice expensive rebrand as well. Great.
Thank you, Chair. Two things I want to go into. Page 162, we're in the Ombudsman's letter, but it's the social care ombudsman letter. Twice threatening or witness someone's alleged response by the housing department. That strikes me as being something that's seriously embarrassing and done seriously wrong. So I'm looking for a comment from the chief executive on that, please.
Yes, sorry, which page?
162, please, and it's the letter from the Ombudsman to you as the chief executive.
Yes, so obviously when I got that letter, I was horrified and contacted the Housing Department immediately. They actually, with some grounds, showed me the information that they had sent to the Ombudsman. So I think there had been some miscommunication, but the Ombudsman was of the view that they hadn't sent everything. So we had done a return, but then the Ombudsman was of the view that they hadn't sent everything. Nonetheless, we shouldn't find ourselves in that position. And they have since then tightened up their process and making sure that the exec director sees every Ombudsman complaint and the tracking the Ombudsman, because often Ombudsman complaints are very detailed and involve quite a lot of work. So you can't leave them till 2 days before you need to get back to the Ombudsman. So
is that the problem, that it was left till?
No, well, so I actually think it was a really it's a complex complaint, as they often are. Taking place over quite a long time, and I think the service genuinely thought that they had returned the information that Ombudsman had asked for. That was not the Ombudsman's view. But I think had there been a bit more quality assurance as to what had gone back to the Ombudsman, then we might have avoided getting that letter.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the second point, also on non-Ombudsman subject, so this is page 154, paragraph 9. The archives complaints. It says one has been excluded due to the nature of the complaint. I would have thought there's quite a high bar for excluding something because there's a public interest in disclosure without, of course, identifying individual details. So what assurances can you give us tonight that the withholding of this complaint is not covering up something that would be of reputational damage to the council and therefore is in the public interest to disclose?
Can we take that away and come back to you with the details? I suspect there's a sensitivity to it.
I'm sure there is I would like to think there is a very good reason for it, but I would like to have assurance that there is a good reason.
Absolutely. Okay, Sophie, I'll leave that.
And points 2 and 3, 3 and 4, I think I'll leave in the interest of time, which are less.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got a quick question on page 154 on this one's case 2. In this one in particular, this looks like someone who was told to return to the family home when they should have probably been put into accommodation that would keep them safe. I just wondered whether the council's actually gone through training, or the officers in that department have gone through training. When you do get someone who's a domestic abuse situation, you don't send them back to the same place.
Well, that was the case that we did discuss fairly exhaustively, wasn't it, last time?
Yes, it was the public interest case that you had here, and I can confirm that there has subsequently been quite extensive further training for the housing needs team, and they also have an embedded domestic violence specialist within the service.
And then looking at case 1, I think it was £5,800 time spent in unsuitable accommodation. Whether that is systematic across the whole of housing, or whether that's actually been dealt with. Do we have lots of people spending time in unsuitable accommodation?
Again, I'll just come in on that one quickly because I have gone over this with the team. So this one is the local government ombudsman, and the housing ombudsman one report is at the end. So that the unsuitable accommodation referred to in all of those cases is temporary accommodation. So that it's about the length of time, spent in accommodation that TA that is then deemed to be unsuitable. And you'll see that point arises in a number of these ombudsman cases. Local government ombudsman cases, and I think it is. If you look at local government ombudsman report, I think it is a theme across London because of the temporary accommodation situation.
Well, I just would like some more clarity on. Well, I wrote down the word prevention because that's what we use in schools, trying to early intervention to prevent cases becoming escalated through, usually a safeguarding procedure. It's parallel. You said that for good reason, the Ombudsman has said that you shouldn't prevent complaints. Where there is something that's gone wrong and needs to be put right, absolutely, I can see the strong case for the Ombudsman saying that you should actually encourage people to make complaints. However, what are the avenues for interacting with the service level by the department? The feedback lessons about what they can do better in terms of their service level to stop there being something wrong in the first place.
Yeah, so if you're dying to tell us what
I am
that one.
So we have as part of the new system and the new process we've put in place, we record now on a system all of the complaints. So we have an understanding of the things, which is where the data is able to come to from. But it does mean as well that we get themes and lessons and trends, because it will record the nature of the complaint, whether any remedial action was taken and whether it was upheld. So quarterly, we take to each executive director and their management team a report that sets out the kind of trends and lessons that are taken from the complaints that have come through to their service, with some recommendations about it. There's a kind of pattern emerging around a particular issue.
Example.
They might like to look at that. Oh, I can't think of one.
Moles, we might be that.
What recent
Yeah, where we find an example.
Don't worry about it now, but maybe that's something that next time when you report,
it'd
be interesting to
Yeah,
see.
yeah, we'll do a case for next
So
time.
one's been in the public
So
press
it's
that have been moles, you know.
Yes.
But I'm just talking more about lessons learned and how to deal with it. But anything else from you?
No, that was it.
Scrutiny?
A very quick observation, and just taking the point further from what Claire said. In housing, when I've dealt with the social housing, I'm afraid this figures of amazing, response. It's definitely hasn't been my experience.
Can we record that as a complaint?
You can, absolutely. And and it's across the board, and it just falls through system, and it's always you phone one department and it's they'll come back to you. It doesn't happen. And even I personally have spoken to somebody in the department, and I just say it's just myself, no as a counsellor, and I think there's a there's a lot of work that's needed, especially in the social housing front. It's so that's all I want to say. Thank you very much, Judy. Thank you.
Okay, and one final point from me is there any way in which we should include some benchmarking in this report in future? I realise it's different because every council has a different sort of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, whatever approach. But if there is some sense in which we can kind of, work out whether we're dealing with complaints, not necessarily the number of complaints, but whether we're dealing with them more efficiently and in a more timely way than other people, that would be helpful. But just as an idea for the next year.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
And other than that, thank you very much indeed, and I'm sorry we've kept you so late. Thank you. We will now turn back to our own business and paper 8. Deadline 8. We're looking at our full, right, it's full plan decisions. Where we fall over the tables. Okay, the pages aren't numbered. Oh, they are, sorry. So we're talking about page 177, 178, 179.
No, question 179. I just don't quite understand what's this note here about Nottingham, Nottingham. I'm not quite sure what the
179. What's it?
179, page 179.
Yep.
Shareholder committee.
Oh, shareholder committee, right, we do. Yeah. So your question is?
Which I don't really understand what that means.
Can we get you some more information about the shareholder committee?
Yes.
Lovely, thank you. 180, 181, 182.
Can I get some more information on the integrated calculator cells stuff? Because it's like I was notified on the 17th of June, which is an update on.
Thank you. It's on page 182, page 183.
What's that? Okay, sorry.
184.
Yeah.
Okay, what's your queries?
Yeah, because I just want more information about that.
What's she talking about? Sorry.
Octavia Housing.
Which page was that? Sorry.
183. Yeah, I want to know more about that. And there should be somebody in to. And Octavia is like, I'm fairly sure it's.
Becky's made a note of that one. Yeah. Put some more information on that. That was page 183, 184, 185, 186.
186, the approved terms of transfer of homes from the register provided into the council. I was concerned about are we taking on liabilities of repairs that can't deal with themselves? Is this, do we pay for taking something in, taking on an asset? Do we take on the liabilities associated with that?
We'll have more information on that.
Just some more information on that.
Yeah. 186, 187, 188, 189, 190, 191, and 192.
Yeah. I'm just thinking on 192 and 193, because they go over the page, the soft FM and the hard FM, the contracts we've been hearing about changes to those. And it's a while since we looked at them in this committee, and I don't have a particular view on whether they're urgent or not, but I'm just wondering if we all.
Well, probably we should let the new contracts bed in.
So certainly the hard contracts, as I heard, hasn't been reissued yet. So that's actually delayed.
But it's quite far down the process, isn't it?
You did have a paper on them, so we came to a meeting.
We did.
It was a while ago.
But it was a
So you
while
had to
back.
follow up on
Probably.
that. It was quite a long
I wonder,
time ago.
were you chairing, Mary, or was it going back?
Yeah, Mary was chairing. You asked about the committee, but it was quite a long time ago.
So that was what it struck me as being a while since we looked at both soft FM and hard FM, and we were hearing about sort of changes, and maybe it's about time we have another look, because they are quite a significant cost.
They're very significant costs. But as we've just left the soft FM one, should we let it bed in for 6 months before we?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, there's been some changes to it that we heard about tonight.
Yes, well, dividing into two, and whether the hard one, I'm not sure where we are on the process.
I think there was something about it in the budget report.
I thought it was delayed and they had the issue with the savings as a result. I think that's what
It was the
flagged.
soft FM that was delayed, and that they didn't get the savings this
So
year.
I came off another pre-call housing when the paper said that hard one was delayed.
Okay, well, let's look into let's accept the principle that we'll look at it again, but look into the
Can find out some more and look into it.
Okay, Toby, did I see you put your hand
Yes,
up?
quickly, but no, you can answer. It's the Kensington Park Road streetscape. It's quite controversial, the consultation. I don't know if it's to here, there's two completely different versions of reality being discussed with this whole subject.
Sorry, Toby, was that
Page 191. I mean, it ties in with all the consultation stuff more bang on about, but it's a very emblematic example.
Oh, so that, if it was going to be done, that would be with Greg. I can get you more information, but yeah.
Start with more information.
More information.
So going back to 188, I asked about how we were handling taking housing in.
Yeah.
Which is Jackie's already. Thank
Yeah,
you
makes
for
sense.
further information on that. But on 188, we've got Cochrane and so on, the in effect housing we built that we're putting out to a provider. Similar question around what are the conditions and responsibilities on cost.
Responsibilities and costs.
We take housing in.
192?
Yeah. No, 190. We need some more information on properties. 190.
The options for vacant
Yeah.
unacquired properties. Okay.
I think that's something that Claire and I had a brief on in the last council year.
It might be good then to have an update on it.
Yes, but I think it's the one I think it is. Isn't that the very sensitive? No, it might not be actually. No, might not be the very sensitive one we had a break on. But yeah, probably want to definitely is what's.
We'll get some more. Yeah, I don't think it is. I don't think it's the one you're referring to, Greg. I think it's part of the decisions that have been made around the HRA.
Right, 192, 193, 194. Sorry.
All information, do these convert into papers or do they get emails?
It depends. So what you're asking here is for, I think, more information. And when you've got that information, scrutiny chairs can decide if they want to get a report to commissioner report or committee. So for the housing ones, they would look at it and decide if it should come to housing and communities, because it's not possible some of these to know really if it doesn't need more scrutiny.
And now we've got the supplementary for family keepers. So can you just remind us, Jackie, why we've got a supplementary? You said, sorry.
Yeah, what happened was that they were supposed to be on the forward plan, the event over the agenda, but the technology I didn't know when I was producing it. I forgot to select the correct date. So information.
So the filter went wrong.
Yes. So basically, key decisions from the 16th of October.
I didn't mean to make you rehearse your an embarrassment. So I'm very sorry.
No, it was my error.
Well, it's very kind of you to own up. So, but let's have a look. Page 1, page 2, page 3.
Yes.
Yes, page 3.
So there are two. The review decants policy, voice and letting policy, and also the review repairs recharge policy. And I would just like to make sure that I keep an eye on those, just in the first instance, so especially the decants.
Decants and repairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll ask Doug for some more information.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so page 4. Oh, I've got page 6, page 7, and then page 8. Numbers got a bit askew. I'm just looking.
Okay, on page 4 there.
There's different types of numbering.
Page 4.
So page 4, yeah.
Authorise the review repairs recharge policy. Is there any further clarity on how recharge to leaseholders is being managed, with leaseholders being landed with large lumps of cost?
So Claire's asked about it, and you want the committee additional information on leaseholders. Okay.
Sorry.
It's over the offices.
Page 6. The final item.
Page 5 or page 6?
5.
6.
Last one.
No final item for the leader of the council. Several of legal costs. I think that is something that we should at least keep across that.
When you say keep across, when you say keep across, what do you mean?
I mean, perhaps we might need some more information.
Okay.
Right. Some of that might be sensitive, confidential.
So I can refer to what it is if it's helpful.
Yes.
And then so the as part of the global settlement, the lawyers for payments have legal costs that need to be settled separately from the actual settlement itself, and there is a negotiation that's going on that we don't have a role in, but when that negotiation concludes, we will need to pay our share as defendant in quite short order, and it might well be the kind of amount of money that requires a decision. So that's why it's on the board plan, and we didn't want to do it under urgency, even though it will need to be done at short notice. So we wanted to get it on the board plan in good time. Thank you. So
that's yes, thank you. Thank you.
Have we finished going through this? Is everyone happy that we looked through that? I was taking it with equanimity. Have I done everything, Jackie?
Unless there's anything.
No, in the absence of any urgent other business, The meeting is closed. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry, it's such a marathon. I went to the gym tomorrow, I came, so I'm not.